Welcome, everyone, to the Ready for the Draft podcast. I am your host, Gregg Schutze. This is episode 34 of the 2024 podcast series, where we take a look at the draft-eligible prospects and get you ready for the NFL draft. And, well, this is really the NFL draft review, putting an end to the 2024 podcast series from Caleb Williams all the way to Jalen Key, 257 draft picks. And I'll tell you what, I think we always talk about narratives on the Ready for the Draft podcast. We talk about narratives. What is the narrative for this year's draft? And obviously, I think the first and foremost, you're talking about the most quarterbacks that we've ever seen taken, not only in the first round, but since what, the 83 draft. But most quarterbacks taken in the first 12 picks, staggering. Plus 14 offensive players taken to start the draft. That's the first, the most that we've ever seen, not only to start a draft, but really the most consecutive players on the offensive side of the football in the draft's history. Insane how that all played out. As a result, you look at some of the teams later on in the draft, a lot of the teams that are playoff teams landing some defensive players. So, I think at the end of the day, the way that everything shook out, it's going to be interesting to see where some of those teams end up landing with some of those top-end prospects. A lot of defensive players that slid down the board as a result of really, this thirst for the quarterback. I understand, there are teams that are out to get that quarterback, but I think we saw some reaches, right? Atlanta reaching for Michael Penix Jr. I understand that you have that Raheem Morris was talking about having that succession plan. But if you spend $100 million on Kirk Cousins, that feels like win now mode. And if it's win now mode, what do you need more than anything else? You need to put pressure on the quarterback, whether it's an edge rusher or to get someone like Byron Murphy II, whom I mocked to Atlanta. That would then give Raheem Morris that defensive tackle in the same mold as Aaron Donald. But they go quarterback. It's a little puzzling. I understand when we look at things and we look at, depending on the situation with Kirk and the injury and everything, but again, $100 million, that feels like we're just a quarterback away. What was I saying earlier in my podcast series? I was saying that Atlanta really feels like a quarterback away, a good quarterback away from really contending in the AFC South. You spent the last 3 first-round picks on tight end Kyle Pitts, wide receiver Drake London, running back Bijan Robinson. You also have Tyler Algier and a pretty solid offensive line. You just need that quarterback. And that was really what I thought they had when they signed Kirk Cousins. So, that was a surprise. I think Denver, I've been saying Bo Nix, just doesn't feel like a guy that you would draft number 12 overall. This is a guy that I think, you trade back into round 1. And look, he could prove everyone wrong. He could end up being the guy for Sean Payton. It could end up taking him to that next level. When I think about Drew Brees and when he came out of Purdue, talking about is he a system quarterback, things like that, and is the arm strength going to be there? A lot of different things about Drew Brees, and we know what happened there. Hall of Fame quarterback, Super Bowl winner there with Sean Payton there in New Orleans. Is Bo Nix on the same caliber? I mean, look, yes, he played in 61 games. I don't know, and that's the part that it doesn't feel right, taking him at number 12 overall. But again, we'll see how all of it plays out. So what are we here for? Really what I want to do is go through each of these teams, take a look at their draft picks, talk through really where everything landed. Was there anything that was left out? And really just kind of give you my thoughts on the NFL draft. So we'll go alphabetically, make things easy. Atlanta, hey, we'll go ahead and get to talk about you second. But first and foremost, let's go ahead and talk about the Arizona Cardinals. And obviously this was a no-brainer. Number 4 overall, taking Marvin Harrison Jr. And this made a whole lot of sense. When you look at it, Kyler Murray needs that number 1 wideout. He doesn't have Larry Fitzgerald. He doesn't have Nuke Hopkins. Heck, he doesn't have A.J. Green or Christian Kirk anymore. He needs that go-to wideout, and that's really what you get with Marvin Harrison Jr. Again, no-brainer. You saw what they already did in last season's draft when they took Paris Johnson Jr. There was a lot of talk. Well, maybe Arizona would trade down. They need all this other, their other needs. This this just was not the time. Monty Austin Ford, I thought he got it right, taking Marvin Harrison Jr., get that number 1. And then at number 27 overall, this was a pick that I flirted with in round number 2. And really, that first round pick as a possibility. And that was Darius Robinson. What have I said? Bilal Nichols, who, everyone had penciled in as a potential defensive end, defensive tackle. Bilal Nichols had 5 sacks in Chicago in 2000 when he played nose tackle. That's where he belongs. Darius Robinson playing at defensive end. I love the pick. They need someone who can help get after the quarterback. What I would have liked to have seen them do is target an edge rusher as well in this draft. We just didn't see that happen. Max Melton, love that pick. He's a guy that I think will start opposite Sean Murphy-Bunting. They got him in round number 2. I had him coming off the board in the second round. Look, Elijah Jones falling to round number 3. Another guy who has ball skills for days. I look at this group and I'm thinking, all right, Bunting Jr., Melton, Elijah Jones, you've got a lot of playmakers there. That's really, they double dipped at that cornerback spot. I thought that they would, with Starling Thomas and Devon Wilson and Garrett Williams and Keitrell Clark. They needed to address that position, and they did so very well with this draft. Trey Benson, I thought that was a great pick as well. I thought they would go running back at some point in the draft. You need to get a running mate with James Conner. I think that's where James Conner is at his best. Trey Benson's the guy that, look, he runs with physicality. He also, has that speed, sub 4.4 speed. This is a guy that's going to be able to break off some runs. And then, everyone talked about, well, they're going to go tackle, right? They're going to absolutely go tackle. Paris Johnson Jr., Jonah Williams. Well, in round number 3, they end up going with Isaiah Adams, a guy who can play both tackle and guard. He's the guy that's going to ultimately supplant Elijah Wilkinson at that left guard spot. I love that pick. And then, look, I'm a big fan of Tip Ryman. I think I had him coming off the board in round number 4, but I like that pick there in round 3. Look, you pair him up with Trey McBride, who, look, let's face it, he had a breakout year last year, led the team in receptions, and I look at Tip Ryman. Yes, he's a blocking tight end, but he's also a guy that showcased some athleticism there at the combine. Love that pick. Dadrian Taylor Demerson, one of the best safeties in the draft, a guy that, look, he came off the board in round 4. I thought he could come off the board in round 3, so that's good value. He's a guy that, look, Buda Baker, how much longer is he going to be playing in Arizona? He's a guy that could end up supplanting him potentially there. He's also a guy that could even, move into that nickel spot there with Garrett Williams. Xavier Thomas. They finally do get the edge rusher in Xavier Thomas in round number 5. And look, the biggest thing with Xavier Thomas, he's shown the athleticism. I think 18 career sacks. But the problem is he can't stay healthy. If he can stay healthy, he's the guy that I think would definitely help out this group. There's just not a whole lot of production there. Dennis Gardeck, 6 sacks to lead the group. But Zaven Collins, they declined, the 5th-year option there for Zaven Collins so far. Really been, a bust coming out of Tulsa. We're waiting to see what he can do. Christian Jones, I thought, 6th round was probably where Christian Jones was going to come off the board. He actually comes off the board in round number 5. A guy that, look, Paris Johnson Jr., if he ultimately moves over to left tackle, especially if Jonah Williams goes down to injury, then I think Christian Jones can step in there at right tackle. Tawan Palmer at UAB. That was an interesting pick. 6'2", 210, a vertical threat. That's really the biggest thing when you look at this group. Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch, Chris Moore, Zach Pascal. They needed another vertical threat, and so that's why I think they went with Tawan Palmer. And then Jaden Davis, in the 7th round, a corner. Played 4 years at OU. He's a guy that I think will struggle to make the roster. I think especially because you have Dadrian Taylor Demerson, who is versatile enough to play in the nickel to back up Garrett Williams. Jaden Davis, I think, is a guy that's going to struggle to make the roster, but he's definitely a guy to keep an eye out for as we go into training camp. Now, Atlanta. Again, Michael Penix Jr. taking number 8 overall. I love Michael Penix Jr. In terms of what he did there at Washington, the deep ball accuracy. I mean, there are few quarterbacks who throw with just that effortless, fluid motion to throw a ball 50, 60 yards to the wide side of the field on a line and just drop it in a bucket. It's phenomenal. I mean, when you think about it, Carson Palmer was a guy coming out of USC, and he could do a lot of those same things. Make those pinpoint accuracy throws. The biggest thing that you worry about, obviously, are the injuries. That's why he came out and ran ran that sub 4.640 to showcase, hey, 37-inch vertical leap. I want to say, he showed off, hey, I'm fine, I'm okay. And Atlanta, the succession plan, we just talked about that. Again, bit of a question mark in terms of really where all of this is going to play out. Then what do they do in round number 2? They go with Rook Ororo. They don't go with an edge rusher. They go with Rook. But the one thing I will say is they got their edge rusher in round number 3 in Braylon Trice, a guy that I had coming off the board early in round 2. So I think the fact that they get him in round 3, that's a great win there. Because Braylon Trice, let's not get confused about who he is. Braylon Trice is a guy that is effort all day long. I think the biggest concern that I have with Braylon Trice was actually watching him at the combine. This is a guy that had to continue to learn and have to be told the drills more often and had to repeat drills. But 18 sacks in the last 3 years, 28 and a half tackles for loss, a guy that lived in opposing backfields, but it was the pressures, it was just the effect that he had on the game, not just getting to the quarterback, that I think is a win there. With Rook Ororo, I look at him and the question really is going to be, where is he going to play? Because I think Grady Jarrett is going to be your D tackle. I think Zach Harrison right now is your defensive end. They're playing a 34 defense there in Atlanta under Jimmy Lake. So is he a nose tackle behind David Onyemata? Is he a defensive end? I don't think so, because that's where Brandon Dorlus is going to play. That's that he's your number 4 or your 4th round pick. He's that backup there. I think Rook could potentially move to that defensive tackle spot. I think there is some versatility there with Ororo. What I like about him is his ability to put pressure on the quarterback. He uses that length to his advantage and gets a good push, pretty quick off the ball as well, very athletic, and his first real true year to really showcase what he can do in 2023 as a full-time starter. But look, 25 and a half tackles for loss, 12 sacks in his career, 9 pass breakups. This is a guy that can affect the play from the interior. And then you look at Brandon Dorlus again, like I said, in round number 4. This is a guy that is versatile enough to be a 5 technique in a 34 defense. We saw that there at Oregon. And with Dorlus, he's a guy, look, he's athletic. He played both D tackle and D end, as I said. 27 tackles for loss, 12 sacks, but 14 pass breakups. This is a guy who uses his length to his advantage. Excellent timing. JD Bertrand, I honestly thought it was a little high to take him there in round number 5, but I was looking at potentially getting another linebacker to the team with Caden Ellis, Nate Landman, and Troy Anderson. JD Bertrand is a guy that I think will go into that group and be a special teams ace. Jace McClellan out of Alabama. They get that running back. He's going to battle Avery Williams for that number 3 running back spot. I think Bijan and Tyler Algier are those top 2 guys. Jace McClellan has some power to his game, and so that's one of the things that I think will be a nice fit there. Casey Washington, a guy that, look, I didn't have him getting drafted, but when I look back on it, I probably should have, especially with the way that he showed up East-West Shrine game, and he was a weapon there for Illinois. At 6'2", 190 pounds, a guy that really had his biggest year this past season. 49 catches, 670 yards, 4 touchdowns. I look at his game. He's a guy that could be a possession receiver. And, they've got Darnell Mooney. They've got Rondale Moore. Casey Washington has some size that they can add to that receiving group. So I like that pick. And then Zion Logue was actually a bit of a surprise there, coming out of Georgia in the 6th round. I think he's a guy that is stout at the point of attack against the run. Not huge as far as a pass rusher, but a guy that can take up a lot of space. 6'6", 314 pounds. He's a guy that I could see absolutely as that nose, but he's mostly a run defender. So really the question when you've got Rook and Zion there is what's the future of Eddie Goldman? Is Eddie Goldman going to stay on that roster? That's a big question mark. Taquan Graham, Kentavious Street are other guys on this group. Is it just a matter of we're just going to have a lot more depth at the position, on that defensive line, or are some of these guys, is there a question as to whether or not they're going to stick around with this team? I think that's something to keep an eye on there in Falcons camp. Baltimore sitting there at number 30 overall, just kind of twiddling their thumbs on day one, and they get Nate Wiggins, Mr. 4.2840 that falls into their lap. This is a guy that is tailor-made for this group. He's a physical corner, a guy that, effort all the time. And, you put him on the outside. Brandon Stevens, Marlon Humphrey, definitely a nice pickup there. Then in round 2, how the heck does Roger Rosengarten end up falling to them? They've got a starting right tackle there in Rosengarten. He's going to start opposite Ronnie Stanley, especially now that Morgan Moses is gone. I thought they were going to go on Marius Mims. Look, Mims went a lot sooner. So Rosengarten in round number 2, that was a heck of a pickup. Then you look at Adiza Isaac in round number 3. They needed to get another guy to put pressure on the quarterback. Look, Kyle Van Noy, yes, he had 9.5 sacks, which I believe was a career high for him this last season, but he's getting a little long in the tooth. And you look at, Odafe Owe and David Ojabo, they're struggling at times to get pressure on the quarterback. They stay there at Penn State, and much like, Owe, I think Adiza Isaac, I think that's really good value. 30th pick in round number 3. Devontae Walker, a guy that I had coming off the board in round number 3. They get him in round 4. Another guy who's a vertical threat, excellent size. Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, there's still question marks there. If Devontae Walker can showcase that ability to stretch the defense, he can end up being what Rashad Bateman has not been able to accomplish yet for that group. TJ Tampa, another big corner. This is clearly they were targeting that cornerback group. I think ultimately with TJ Tampa, he's going to compete with Brandon Stevens on the opposite side from Nate Wiggins for a potential starting spot. Physical corner, good size. Rasheen Ali at running back. You've got Justice Hill there, who's battled some injuries. Derrick Henry obviously is the bell cow. We know this. Keaton Mitchell, I think, is a guy that solidified status as that number 2 back. But Rasheen Ali, keep an eye out for him. This is a guy who's exceptionally quick. The ruptured biceps tendon at the Senior Bowl, but look, he's got the burst. This is a guy that racked up some yards. He's a good pass catcher as well. I like that pick there, round number 5. Devin Leary, around early, I was kind of surprised that he came off the board when he did. But look, they've got Josh Johnson right now backing up Lamar Jackson. They need to get another guy in there. And Devin Leary is the guy that, I think could end up potentially being a spot starter. The big question mark with him, obviously, is, that drop and play from NC State to Kentucky. What the heck happened there? That's why I thought he'd fall to round number 2. Round number 7, but he ends up, 42nd pick in round number 6. They get Nick Samick in round 7, a center, depth piece behind Tyler Linderbaum, and then Sanusi Kane. This is a physical safety there coming out of Purdue. Another guy that fits the mold there. He's aggressive, comes up and runs support. I figured they want to target another safety. Was a little bit surprised that they went with the strong safety route, but this is a guy that can end up being that third safety, especially a guy that you can play in the box with Kyle Hamilton and Marcus Williams playing at depth. Although Hamilton, you want to play him around the line of scrimmage. You want to play him back on the back end of the defense. I think adding Kane to the mix could potentially give him some of that versatility. Again, 7th round pick, so most of his play, at least starting out, will probably be in special teams. Takes us to the Bills. Now the Bills, they end up trading out of their spot there at 29. They allow the Chiefs to get Xavier Worthy, but look, they also trade out of that number 32 spot with Carolina, and they end up getting Keon Coleman. Now, this was a pick that I actually had targeted at one point, and I love the Keon Coleman pick. He's already become a fan favorite. You've seen all the interviews and everything already. This dude, personality for days. But what I loved was, you watch that game against Florida State. You watch how he won in a lot of different ways. The physicality, and his ability to high point the football, just attacks the ball like that basketball player that he was at Michigan State. And look, yeah, he ran a 4.65 40. And I know that, typically that's blasphemous to draft a guy who runs in the 4.6s in the top, as a top 50 pick. But this guy, look, again, we talk about, they've talked about it at nauseum on ESPN, on NFL Network. They've talked about how Puka Nacua had the fastest GPS on the gauntlet. Who had the fastest this year? Keon Coleman. I love the pick. He's going to be wide receiver 1 there for Josh Allen, and with good reason. I had Cole Bishop going to the Bills there. That just fit. You lose Jordan Poyer, you lose Micah Hyde. Yes, you got Taylor Rapp there, but I look at Cole Bishop. He's going to start at free safety. This is a guy that is athletic enough Look, they talked. I heard some people talking about, well, he wasn't the most athletic. Dude ran a 4.45 40, and I think he jumped like close to 40 inches in the vertical leap. You watched him at the Senior Bowl, his ability to cover tight ends, lock them down. Cole Bishop to me is going to be a star on the back end of the defense there for the Bills. Dwayne Carter coming off the board in round number 3, the end of round 3, but this is a very much a Bills pick. I think Dwayne Carter, the big question mark with him is, can he get back to that form from the 2022 season where he was just virtually unstoppable. This is a guy that was getting after the quarterback, getting that tremendous push. I look at Deshaun Williams, I look at Austin Johnson, who they brought in to back up Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones, but I think Dwayne Carter will find his way onto the football field there for the Bills as a backup into that rotation. I love the Ray Davis pick, backing up James Cook. Ray Davis is another guy who is an exceptional pass catcher. I thought that when he made that move from Vandy to Kentucky after starting his career there at Temple, this was really kind of that breakout. Everybody got to see what he could do. Over 1,100 yards, 14 touchdowns. Guy with 94 catches in his career, including 33 this past season and another 7 touchdowns. Guy can do a little bit of everything. I love that pick for them. They get Cedric Van Pron-Granger to take over ultimately at that center spot. I think Connor McGovern's there right now. I think Cedric Van Pron can end up taking over that spot. Look, they lost Mitch Morse to Jacksonville. Love this pick. There in round number 5. I thought that was a round later than where I had him slated. Edefuan Olafosio coming off the board in round number 5. Another guy. Look, you look at this linebacking core. They got Matt Milano, they got Terrell Bernard, Dorian Williams, who's shown some good athleticism, and then Edefon, Olafosio is another guy he's a little undersized. He's 6'1", I think 225, but you watch the athleticism in coverage especially, and that's where I think he's going to shine for them. I love the Javon Solomon pick there in round 5. Excellent value. This is a guy that can get after the quarterback in a hurry. You got Rousseau, you got Epinesa, DeJuan Smoots there. They bring in Casey Toohill. Von Miller, what's the status there with him? I think Javon Solomon is the guy that's going to bring a ton of juice. This was the guy that was the leading sack artist in the FBS a season ago at Troy. When you talk about Troy pass rushers, you think of DeMarcus Ware. This guy's a different type of body, 6'2", 246. But 16 sacks this past season. Had a couple years removed from 11 in 2021. A guy that can definitely bend coming off the edge. Love that pick. Tyler Grable coming off the board in round 6, athletic left tackle. He's a guy that I think can play both left and right tackle, but I look at him to ultimately be the backup there for Deion Dawkins. Daquan Hardy, the diminutive corner coming out of Penn State, only 5'9", but definitely a guy who has tremendous speed and a guy that I think will battle Cam Lewis to back up Teron Johnson there at the nickel. And then Travis Clayton. This was a guy that I don't think anybody really had much on, but he was a rugby player. He's one of those developmental prospects, right? Because he's from England, 4'7", 940 at 6'7", 307 pounds. I mean, dude's intriguing skill set for sure. When you think of Jordan Mailata, and because of the international player, I forgot exactly what they call it, player exemption or what have you. This is an interesting pick and a guy that can play tackle, he can play guard, can give you a lot of versatility there. So I think it's an intriguing pick for sure. Round 7 makes a lot of sense. You get to Carolina. Carolina didn't have their first round pick, but they trade into round number 1 to get Xavier Legette. This was a guy that I had going to them at the top of round number 2. They just made it a pick earlier, and I think this is a guy that has a chance to be the number 1 receiver there. I know Adam Thielen went over 1,000 yards a season ago. Deontay Johnson's going to play in the slot, but Terrace Marshall, Jonathan Mingo, they're developing a receiving core there for Bryce Young. But Xavier Legette's an intriguing prospect because look, he's got tremendous size. He's 6'1", 220 pounds essentially, but a guy that runs exceptionally fast. And a guy that can be a vertical threat. He can be physical, will win those 50-50 balls. I think he'll end up being that number one target there. You love what they did too. They also get a running back in Jonathan Brooks and a tight end in Jatavion Sanders. Jonathan Brooks, I think everybody was expecting him to go to Dallas. Carolina ends up trading up into the draft in round number 2 to get Jonathan Brooks, who I think will end up being the starter ahead of Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders. Jonathan Brooks, yes, he's coming off the ACL tear, but this is a guy that through 11 games there at Texas, 187 carries, over 1,100 yards, to 6.1 yards per carry. This dude, that was the lowest per carry average that he had in his career. But 10 touchdowns, also had 25 receptions, 11.4 yards per reception as well. Tremendous speed, a guy that was a threat to take it the distance on any given play. I had Jatavion Sanders coming to them at the top of round number 3, but they ended up getting him at the top of round 4. And this is a guy that I think will battle Tommy Tremble for that starting tight end spot, a guy that's going to be a threat up the seam. And then Trevin Wallace in round 3. I thought they were going to end up taking in round 2. I thought they were going to end up targeting Edgerrin Cooper. They end up, to trade up to get Jonathan Brooks. They only have 1 pick in round 2, also trading into round 1. So they only had the 1 pick in round 2. But Trevin Wallace, I think this is a guy that's going to eventually take over for Shaq Thompson. Shaq Thompson's, played his entire career there in Carolina. But I think Trevin Wallace is a guy that's going to end up being that heir apparent. I like Charles Smith-Wade in round number 5. This is a guy that I think could end up being a starting corner at the next level. I really do. 5'10", 184 pounds, quicker than he is fast for sure, but a guy that has tremendous ball skills, and he showed up well at the Senior Bowl as well. He's a guy that, he's going to battle Troy Hill for that nickel spot. You got J.C. Horn, you got Dane Jackson on the outside. I think Charles Smith-Wade ends up stealing that spot away from Troy Hill. Round 6, they get Jaden Crumedy, and this was a guy that ate up a lot of space, and let the linebackers behind him, Jet Johnson and Nathaniel Bookie Watson, make plays behind him. This is a dude who is physical at the point of attack, stuffs the run. Like I said, takes up a lot of space there, but this is a guy that can also put some pressure on the quarterback. He's a guy that, is he an end? Does he back up A'Shawn Robinson? Does he back up Shai Tuttle? There at nose tackle, I think he offers up some versatility there. And then you get Michael Barrett in round number 7, the linebacker out of Michigan, 5'11", 233, a little undersized. But this is a dude who I think is a physical dude coming downhill. He can cover the tight end as well. He'll be a guy that's going to back up Josie Jewell there at that other inside backer spot. But you look at Wallace and Barrett. Could that potentially be the future linebacking core there in Carolina? That'll be interesting to watch. The Bears. Bears only had 5 picks, but I thought they made the most of them, obviously. I mean, you look at Caleb Williams, number 1 overall. If you listen to my podcast, I'm a huge fan of Caleb Williams. I love what this guy brings to the table. He's oozing confidence, and you just love what Ryan Poles has been able to do for him. With DeAndre Swift, they've got Cole Kmet and Gerald Everett at the tight end position. They also have DJ Moore, Keenan Allen. They get Rome Odunze there at number 9. I was flirting with that, and I almost went back to that pick. I still was thinking they were going to get an edge rusher to pair with Montez Sweat. Yes, they got Austin Booker, but I don't know that moves the needle as much as I was expecting. But Rome Odunze, good Lord, I mean, he can end up being that number 1 receiver in that receiving core, which is scary. So I thought that was a tremendous pickup. They get Karan Amagadaje, tremendous length there. He's going to back up Braxton Jones, another project, if you will, because Braxton Jones is a guy, really has come on there for the Bears, and looks like he could end up being that guy that's going to be protecting Caleb Williams' blind side, for the next next at least few years, but for the foreseeable future for sure. Amagadaje is a guy who I think has that versatility to be a swing tackle and can play both on the left and right side. If Braxton Jones falters, Amagadaje is a guy that, give him a couple of years, he can end up sliding into that spot. Punters. You talk about drafting a punter doesn't make sense. In this case, it does. Torrey Taylor, look, you watch what he was able to do there at Iowa. Cult hero, right? Absolutely a cult hero. Why? Well, I mean, he knew how to flip the field. If Caleb Williams actually texted him and said, hey, you're not going to be punting very often on this team, but here's the thing. If they do get in trouble on offense, 3 and outs, unable to drive, stall out, this is a guy that can flip the field, can take that defense and really play to their advantage. This is going to be a team that, hey, if he's able to drive that football inside the 10-yard line on a consistent basis, force that teams to go the full end of that field against that defense, that's going to be, he's another extension of that offense, really. And then Austin Booker, like I said, in round number 5. This is a guy, look, he's a guy that has tremendous potential. I love him playing there with Montez Sweat. DeMarcus Walker is there as well. I ultimately look at Austin Booker, and I think there's, the potential. Had 8.5 sacks in his first year there at Kansas after transferring from Minnesota. But that's the one thing that I would have liked to have seen was Chicago target another defensive end to really challenge for that starting spot. I think Austin Booker's still a couple of years away. Cincinnati, Amarius Mims at number 18 overall. I was flirting with Mims potentially here. I thought Mims ultimately that was a little too high for me with Amarius Mims because look, he's only started 18 games in his career. This is a guy that hasn't started a ton, but you look at the mammoth Trent Brown, he's going to learn from him, learn from the veteran, and ultimately will end up being that starting right tackle. He again hasn't played in a ton of games, hasn't started very many games, but he looks like he could be a top 15 pick just based on the athleticism that you saw on the field when he was there. So, can he stay healthy enough to ultimately take over for Trent Brown at right tackle whenever Trent Brown moves on? That's the biggest question mark. Chris Jenkins, love this pick. I said that they needed to get somebody in there to ultimately team with B.J. Hill long term because Sheldon Rankins feels kind of like a guy that's only going to be there for a year or two, more of as a rental. I think Chris Jenkins can end up being that guy to team with B.J. Hill. Jermaine Burton gives you that vertical presence, that vertical threat. I still think that they probably could have targeted another receiver. You think about T. Higgins. Is Jermaine Burton a guy that could potentially take over for T. Higgins if he does move on? I don't think so. Is he a guy that ultimately is going to take the place of Tyler Boyd? I don't think so. So that's really the big question mark there is I think they could have gone somewhere else with that number 16 pick in round number 3. McKinley Jackson. Here's a guy that I thought was a day 3 pick. And he's definitely quick, low center of gravity, can push the pocket a little bit, but I thought the inconsistency, that's the biggest thing. The flashes are there, but just the inconsistency had day 3 pick for me. 6'2", 326. He's a guy that's going to provide some depth there. Look, they already have Zach Carter on the roster as well. So I think McKinley Jackson, he's a guy that they clearly are looking to address the interior of that D line. Sheldon Rankins, I don't think they're expecting him to be there that much longer. So I think McKinley Jackson will be a guy that they're targeting to potentially fill in one of those roles as a as a backup. Is he going to be a starter at the next level? I just don't know if that's necessarily the case. They also go with 2 tight ends. Now, this is a team that has Mike Gesicki. They brought him in. They've got Drew Sample. Hasn't really shown up yet since being a second-round pick out of Washington. Tanner Hudson actually came on and surprised, but they bring in Eric All. Eric All, look, this guy, 2 season-ending injuries. Can he stay healthy? And maybe Tanner McLaughlin, drafting him out of Arizona is the insurance policy, but they take them in round number 4, then round 6. Tanner McLaughlin, I think, will ultimately end up being the steal of the draft for the Bengals because this is a guy that he was the safety valve for both Jaden DeLora and Noah Fafita there with the Wildcats, and he can end up being that safety valve there for Joe Burrow in Cincy. Josh Newton, I thought that was a little high for him coming off the board there. They've got Cam Taylor-Britt up and down season. DJ Turner struggled. Josh Newton's a guy that they're going to have to rely upon I'm kind of surprised that Duke Tobin didn't take a corner sooner, around 5. That seems a little late for him, to be perfectly honest. But he's a guy that I think he's physical. He's a press corner, he can reroute. I think he gets himself into trouble at times, but he's a guy that can line up in the slot or on the outside. So I think that versatility is something that they're looking at. Cedric Johnson, a guy that can get pressure on the quarterback, but very stiff as well. Trey Hendrickson, I think I saw that he was asking for a trade potentially. You've got Sam Hubbard, you got Miles Murphy, who they brought in. They've got Cam Sample, Joseph Osai, Cedric Johnson. He's a guy that's going to have to push for playing time, to be honest with you. When you look at a guy like Dijon Anthony, this is a guy that is he going to be a nickel for them potentially? At 6 foot 195, long arms, a guy that has good ball skills. I look at that safety position. They bring in, they've got Von Bell. They bring in Geno Stone. You got Jordan Battle and Dax Hill on the roster as well. So are they bringing him in for safety help? Probably not. He's probably going to end up being that nickel when it's all said and done. And then you look at I said that they were going to need to get a center because Trey Hill and Ted Karras, the starter, are free agents at the end of the season. They bring in Matt Lee out of Miami, transfer from UCF. This guy was a leader on that defense, a 4-year starter. On the offensive line at the pivot. And this is a guy that was a technician. Not the best athlete by any means, but this is a guy that, intelligent player and a team leader. He's going to be, one of those guys that's going to take over the locker room. I think he's going to be a fan favorite as well. So I like that pick for Cincy there in round number 7. When you look at Cleveland, I flirted with Michael Hall Jr. here. In round 2, I think they definitely need a defensive tackle. Dalvin Tomlinson, Shelby Harris there, Quentin Jefferson. But, Mike Hall is a guy that can put pressure on the quarterback from the interior. Really love that pick. Zach Zinter, the guard out of Michigan, physical player. Everyone remembers, the broken leg against Ohio State. But you look at Joel Bitonio and Wyatt Teller. I think Zach Zinter is ultimately going to replace one of the two of them. Kind of expecting that to happen at some point. In round 5, Jamari Thrash, the receiver out of Louisville. I figured they were going to get another receiver. You got Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, then they traded for Jerry Jeudy. Jamari Thrash is the guy that he's athletic. He has good speed. 6 foot 188. A guy came out of Georgia State and was just a technician with his route running ability, and he showed up there at Louisville, ended up leading the team in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. And he's a guy that I think will end up finding that niche there as that number 4 receiver. Yes, he's going to battle Cedric Tillman, David Bell there for that spot, but I think Thrash ends up coming away with that role. Bookie Watson, Nathaniel Watson, coming off the board in round number 6. And when I look at this, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, Jordan Hicks, Devin Bush at the linebacker spot. But look, Nathaniel Watson, I think a lot of people talk about his physical limitations, but let me tell you this is a guy that's going to attack you coming downhill. 137 tackles this past season, 10 sacks. This is a guy that really 21 in his career, a guy that coming downhill has good instincts, flies around to make plays on the football. And yes, some of the change of direction, there's some questions there. Can he drop into coverage? That's another big question mark. But this is a guy, if you can put pressure on the quarterback, you're going to find a home at the next level. I think he's going to be able to do that just fine. Miles Harden in round 7 out of South Dakota. Good depth piece there at the cornerback spot. He's the guy that I think will challenge Cameron Mitchell for that nickel back spot behind Greg Newsome II. And then Juwan Briggs. I actually thought Cincinnati was going to take him, but Cleveland ends up snatching him up there in round number 7. Cincinnati Bearcats, 6'2", 297. Good size, low center of gravity. I just look at this team with all the D tackles that they have. I think Juwan Briggs, if anything, is going to end up being a practice squad player. Dallas didn't take a running back, and we find out it's because Zeke Elliott was coming back home to the Star. But I think Tyler Guyton, the fact that they drafted him, he's meant to play left tackle because Terrence Steele, they put all that money there. I was hesitant to have Tyler Guyton come off the board here because I wasn't sure if he was going to be able to be that left tackle. Certainly, who am I to question Dallas? Tyler Smith was a guy that they took in round number 1. They gambled on a guy that showed he could play both tackle and guard. He's going to be that left guard. Tyler Guyton there at left tackle. Cooper Beebe is the guy that's ultimately going to end up being that center for them, which is crazy. A guy that's played tackle and guard, was a phenomenal guard there at K-State. We got him in round number 3. He's going to end up being their center. Although I think really his spot is at guard. He'll end up taking over from Zach Martin possibly, but this is a guy who's going to compete with Brock Hoffman, who was an undrafted free agent. I think Cooper Beebe ends up winning that job. And look, 5-position versatility. Those are guys that you can't find very often. Marshawn Nealon was the other guy that they took on day 2, and he ultimately is going to be that defensive end coming out of Western Michigan, and a guy that I think could end up supplanting DeMarcus Lawrence. DeMarcus Lawrence is a guy that's been exceptionally productive opposite Micah Parsons, but there's always been that question mark. Are they going to re-sign him? What's going to happen with him? When I look at Marshawn Nealon, you saw the physicality, you saw the power in his game, you saw that on display at the Senior Bowl. So powerful with his hands, right? 28 tackles for loss, 12 sacks in his career, 4.5 this past season. Now, when you talk about this past season, you look at what this guy, what was bringing to the table. He had 3 sacks against Eastern Michigan and had 1.5 sacks the rest of the year. Is that a problem? Should we be worried about that? That is a bit of a concern. Can he truly get after the quarterback on a consistent basis? But 57 total tackles. This was a guy who had 11 tackles in that game against Eastern Michigan, where he had those 3 sacks. But had 9 against Miami of Ohio, 7 against Syracuse, 7 against Ohio, had another 6 against Iowa, had a sack in that game. This is a guy that's tremendously active, and I think his best football is ahead of him. Maris Lufau in round 3, I actually had them taking Jeremiah Trotter Jr. A bit of a surprise with Maris Lufau because I actually had him coming off the board on day 3. Maybe it's the length, 6'2", 226 pounds. A guy that has pretty good range, a guy that can cover the tight ends. I think that's ultimately why they were targeting him. But when you look at this group, can he supplant Damone Clark at the weak side backer spot? You've got DeMarvion Overshown, who's likely going to end up taking over for Eric Kendricks if he moves on. So where does Maris Lufau fit into this group? That's a big question mark. I think he's more of a depth piece right now. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Maybe they end up having DeMarvion and Eric Kendricks and Damone Clark. Is he a starter? That's going to be a question mark there. I love the pick of Kalen Carson in round number 5. You got Trevon Diggs, you got DeRon Bland, Jordan Lewis there at the nickel, but Kalen Carson's a guy who can end up being that third outside corner, physical player. Can he stay healthy? That's the big question mark right now for him. Ryan Flournoy in round number 6 could end up being a steal out of Southeast Missouri State. 6'1", 202. He's tough. Ran a 4.4, 4.40 at the combine. A guy that is strong after the catch as well. You look at that receiving core. You've got CeeDee Lamb, you got Brandon Cooks, Jalen Tolbert is that number 3 receiver. Kevontae Turpin is more of a slot guy. So where does Ryan Flournoy fit into the mix? He can end up potentially being that number 3 wideout when it's all said and done, depending on what happens there with Jalen Tolbert. Nathan Thomas, he was a tackle there at Louisiana, could end up being a guard. I look at him, he's going to battle Chuma Edoga to be that backup there for Tyler Guyton on the left side. A guy, though, that could also battle TJ Bass and Asim Richards for the backup guard spots. I think that versatility is something that is intriguing. You get him there in round number 7. And then Justin Rogers coming out of Auburn, the defensive tackle. Really this is going to be a guy that's going to be nothing more than a backup there for Mozzie Smith. He's going to battle Carl Davis. I think ultimately he ends up making the roster because they're going to need someone to back up Mozzie, and there just aren't a whole lot of options on the team. He's a big, clogs up the middle, 6'3", 330 pounds. That's really where I see him fitting into the equation there. Denver. Already talked about Bo Nix earlier. They take him number 12 overall. That's going to really be the big question mark of the day, right? What's Bo Nix going to look like? You bring in Bo Nix, you bring in Zach Wilson, Jarrett Stidham. I don't know. We'll see how this all plays out. It's got to be better than what they had with Russell Wilson, right? It's got to. It has to. For Denver's sake. When you look at the the edge rush spot in round number 3. I love that pick of Jonah Ellis. I ultimately thought that Liatu Latu could end up being the pick here, or potentially Dallas Turner. You've got Baron Browning, you've got Nick Benito and Jonathan Cooper, all guys that can get after the quarterback. Benito and Cooper, I think, each had 8+ sacks. Jonah Ellis, double-digit sack guy last year for Utah, and battled some injuries as well. Spin move, that's his cup of tea right there. He's a guy that I think could end up pushing for a lot of playing time. Troy Franklin falling all the way to round number 4 was a huge surprise. He's Bo Nix's go-to guy. So even though you've got Cortland Sutton and Josh Reynolds and Marvin Mims, look at Troy Franklin end up emerging. If you're talking about fantasy sleepers, if Bo Nix is the number 1 quarterback there in Denver, watch out for Troy Franklin. Just saying. Chris Abrams-Jane, look, he's a nickel, I think, but he can potentially play on the outside. You got Levi Wallace. I thought maybe they would go with somebody earlier because look, Jaquan McMillan is going to be your nickel. You got Riley Moss. Like I said, Levi Wallace is there opposite Patrick Surtain. Chris Abrams-Drain could end up being that guy on the outside. He's got good ball skills, a converted wide receiver. They bring in Audric Estime. Audric Estime is a lot like Samaje Perine. Samaje Perine actually has really good hands. That was one of the things that you saw there when Javonte Williams went down to injury. Jaleel McLaughlin handling more of the carries. Samaje Perine catching the football out of the backfield. Audric Estime is a bowling ball. That's one of the things you will say about him. Not the fastest guy. We saw that at the combine, running in the 4.7s, but he's physical. We saw him leaping over defenders. 1,300 yards on the ground, 18 touchdowns this past season, 29 in his career, 17 receptions out of the backfield as well. He's a guy that, ultimately, where does he fit? That's the big question mark. I think ultimately this is shaping up to have an exit potentially for Samaje Perine. Audric Estime as a running back is similar to Samaje. Samaje is just a better pass catcher right now, so that's really the biggest question mark. Where does Audric Estime fit in their plans? Round 7, they get Devon Vele out of Utah, big physical receiver. He's a guy, look, again, Sutton, Reynolds, Mims, Franklin, Tim Patrick has shown up well. This is also a team, Lil Jordan Humphrey. Where does he fit? Again, Vele, I think, 7th round. I thought that was, hey, that's a decent spot to take a flyer on one of these receivers. I think he'll end up being a practice squad guy. And then Nick Gargiulo, the center out of South Carolina. You look at this group, he may end up being a guard, because you've got Ben Powers, Quinn Miners, Luke Wattenberg and Sam Mustipher there, along with Alex Forsythe, center spot. Really just a depth piece along the interior of that line for the Denver Broncos. Which takes us to Detroit. And Detroit loads up on corners. I think that's really the big message. When you look at Aaron Glenn's defense, adding that to that cornerback spot. You've got Carlton Davis, who you traded for. You signed Amik Robertson from Vegas. You've got Brian Branch as your nickel, right? You re-signed Emmanuel Mosley. But then Terrion Arnold falls, and you end up trading up to get him there at 24 overall. Love the pick. Anytime you can get a potential number 1 corner at number 24 overall, you have to jump on it. In round number 2, 29th pick, in round number 2, you get Ennis Rakestraw, another physical corner. This is another guy who's going to be a nice depth piece. He can play both the nickel and on the outside. Very physical corner. I think that's speaks to the type of brand of football that we're going to be seeing there from Aaron Glenn. Giovanni Manu out of British Columbia. So this was an interesting pick. He's 6'8", 350. He's raw. That's one of the things that you will say. He's exceptionally raw. Round 4 feels a bit rich for taking somebody as raw as he is. Is he ready to be a backup? I don't think so. I don't think he'll supplant Dan Skipper, but he's a guy that I think developmentally is a guy that down the road, Jordan Mailata. I think that's the thing that everyone talks about. And where are you gonna find that next guy? Giovanni Manu is a guy that people can potentially we're targeting. I just thought that he was a guy that round 6, round 7 for some of those developmental guys. That's where it makes more sense. Sione Vaki in round number 4 as well. interesting pick. Is he a running back? Is he a safety? That's the big question mark. You look at the safety spot, Melifonwu, Kirby Joseph. I think I was targeting a safety here for the Lions at some point to back those guys up. And so I think Baki, that's really where he's going to fit in. But could he potentially take over that spot that Craig Reynolds currently fills? That's a big question mark. Really, where do they see him in their group? I look at Mekhi Wingo at the D tackle spot, right? They've got Aleem McNeil, they got DJ Reader as their starters, right? Levi Onwuzurike has kind of underachieved to this point. I think Mekhi Wingo is that twitched up, undersized D tackle. I think he's the guy that's going to end up pushing for playing time and could supplant Levi Onwuzurike as that number 2 D tackle behind Aleem McNeil. And then Christian Mahogany, round 6, Boston College. Look, we know the knee injury was a big thing for him, but you've got Graham Glasgow, you've got Kevin Zeitler. This is a really good depth piece. Look, Coyote Awosika, it was a guard that got some playing time, actually held up pretty well. I look at Christian Mahogany as a guy that can end up filling a similar role and be a physical presence along that offensive line. That's one of the things that I think is one of his hallmarks. So it'll be interesting to see really how all of that plays out, that dynamic. Green Bay, sitting there at 25 overall, I honestly thought this was going to be where we were going to see Cooper DeJean come off the board. I really did. Because you look at that cornerback spot, Eric Stokes, Jair Alexander, they struggled last season. Yes, you've got Corey Ballantyne and Carrington Valentine. At the safety spot, you've got Xavier McKinney. I just looked at the fit. It made a lot of sense. But yes, you also need a left tackle to replace David Bakhtiari. Jordan Morgan, though, bit of a surprise that you were going to take him there. A guy that a lot of people were expecting to be a guard. But look, they love the versatility out of their linemen, right? You got Sean Ryan, a guy who played tackle at UCLA. He's playing your right guard. Elton Jenkins, a guy that's been a center, plays tackle, played guard. He's their left guard right now, right? And then you got Zach Tom, a guy who, look, I believe he was a center at Wake Forest. He's your right tackle. So now you get Jordan Morgan to take over and play that left tackle spot, protecting Jordan Love's blind side. 25 just felt a little bit high for him. They trade up to get Edgerrin Cooper. Love this pick. Upgrade over Isaiah McDuffie. I didn't think he was going to be on the board when Green Bay was picking, so when they traded up to get him, that made a whole lot of sense. You team him with Quay Walker. Love that pick there for Green Bay. Then you look at Javon Bullard in round number 2 at number 26 in round number 2. Free safety starter there. Absolutely a guy that can cover in the slot. Very versatile. Plays around the line of scrimmage as well. Love that pick. Marshawn Lloyd, I flirted with this for Green Bay. I said that there was going to be a running back that would team with Josh Jacobs to ultimately supplant A.J. Dillon. This was a team that, look, when you had Aaron Jones and you had Jamal Williams, you still drafted A.J. Dillon on day 2. This is a team, you look at Josh Jacobs and A.J. Dillon, you draft Marshawn Lloyd. I think Marshawn Lloyd will supplant A.J. Dillon. A.J. Dillon ultimately walks this offseason. Tyron Hopper in round number 3. I thought that was a little high for him there, but this is a guy, exceptional range there for Mizzou. He's a good depth piece, a guy that's ultimately going to be that first linebacker on the field after Quay Walker and Edgerrin Cooper. In round 4, Evan Williams. Again, round 4 I thought was a little high for Evan Williams, but a guy that, look, when you watch him run the gauntlet, very confident in his hands, never slowed down, and a guy that, look, he can be a physical presence around the line of scrimmage as well. Love that pick. They take another safety in round 5. I mean, you're talking about 3 safeties. This was a position they really wanted to pay attention to. I think ultimately you've got not only your starters with Xavier McKinney and Javon Bullard, but then your backup as well with Katana Oladapo and Evan Williams. Oladapo was a leader there at Oregon State. Tremendous size. He's a guy that can cover a lot of ground, a guy that's going to play up in the line of scrimmage. Big physical hitter as well. They get Jacob Monk out of Duke in round number 5. Backup for Josh Myers. I think Josh Myers needs to be pushed a little bit. I thought he struggled at times a season ago, so I love that pick there. And then they get Travis Glover, big physical dude there out of Georgia State. good length as well, 6'6", 323 pounds, very powerful, especially in the running game. You look at this group, and they've got Rasheed Walker as the backup there for Jordan Morgan. I think Travis Glover's another guy. Could he play tackle? Could he be guard? I think there's some versatility there. Michael Pratt. You've got Sean Clifford there. Now you draft Michael Pratt. Michael Pratt, in round 7, I thought was good value. Really, the big question mark with Michael Pratt is, consistency. That's the big thing. There's nothing that wows you with his athleticism or his arm strength or anything like that. But a guy that, he was a good, he led Tulane, to some of the biggest wins of that school's, that program's history. Then they take Kalen King out of Penn State in round number 7. This is a guy who I think a lot of people were talking about in the first couple of rounds of the draft, and then 2023 hit. He struggled, and then you saw him at the Senior Bowl really struggle. A guy that got turned around time and time again, was getting beaten left and right. Can he potentially, back up Keyshawn Nixon there at the nickel? Big question mark there. Is he a safety? I don't know that Kalen King, if he's going to end up making a roster, it just won't be in Green Bay. I think what Green Bay's done is they've added a lot of different spots there in that secondary group. I just don't know that there's going to be room left for Kalen King. Takes us to Houston. Houston was the biggest surprise this past season, right? I mean, obviously with C.J. Stroud, you get the number 2 pick overall. Then you get Will Anderson Jr. And this is a team that D'Amico Ryans has them flying and firing on all cylinders. They trade for Stephon Diggs as well. The rich keep getting richer. They sign Daniil Hunter. They get Danico Autry, a couple of guys that are going to get after the quarterback at D end and D tackle respectively. What do they do in round 2? I actually mocked Kamari Lassiter going to this team. I actually think he's the guy that can end up supplanting Jeff Okudah or C.J. Henderson eventually at that outside corner opposite Derek Stingley. But to get him on the field right now, I think he can end up being an upgrade over Desmond King at the nickel spot. Blake Fisher, a guy who I think will ultimately end up taking over at that right tackle position. You look at Titus Howard. Is Titus Howard a tackle? Is he a guard? I see where maybe he might end up taking that guard spot from Kenyon Green, and then they bring in Fisher to be that right tackle spot. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. Kalen Bullock, look, Jimmy Ward, contract year, starting to get up there in age. I think ultimately Kalen Bullock is going to end up starting in place of Jimmy Ward next to Jalen Petrie. This is a guy who covers a lot of ground. Love that pick in round number 3. Cade Stover in round 4. Surprised that he fell that far, but this is a guy that's going to team with Dalton Schultz, a guy that can block, he can catch. Love that pick as well. Then they wait till round number 6. That's the next time that they had a pick. They get Jamal Hill out of Oregon. Depth piece. I thought that was a little high for Jamal Hill, to be perfectly honest with you. Look, Jamal Hill was a DB, moved to linebacker. He's one of those tweeners, and that's the part that I question whether or not he's a guy that's going to end up making that roster. Round 6, they go with Jawar Jordan. Has the speed, but again, you got Joe Mixon, you got Damian Pierce, Dare Ogunbowale on that roster. Where does Jawar Jordan fit into the mix? I think he's got that speed that he has. That's really what he has going for him. That's the question mark there. Solomon Byrd out of USC in round number 7. A guy that, he just wasn't consistent enough. A guy that can put pressure on the quarterback. You've got Derek Barnett on the roster. He's starting to get up there in age. You've got Daniil Hunter. You've got Will Anderson. There's Dylan Horton. I think Solomon Byrd will probably battle Ollie Gay for that final spot, along with Marcus Haynes as that edge rusher. Marcus Harris at D tackle, undersized D tackle. This was a team that, they signed a lot of guys, right? Danico Autry, Foley Fotukasi, Tim Settle, Mario Edwards. Marcus Harris is a guy that's going to have to fight for a position on this roster. But look, he's a guy that can put pressure on the quarterback. Again, undersized. So where does he fit in with this group? He brings it something that I don't think this roster has. And it's that explosiveness on the interior as an undersized defensive tackle. Danico Autry is going to be your stud. He's a little undersized at 6'5", 273 at D tackle, but man, he and Foley, Fotukasi, I like that. Tim Settle, Mario Edwards, where does Marcus Harris fit into the mix? I think he's a guy that can end up, because he can pressure the quarterback from within, that's why he ends up making that roster at the end of the day. And then Ladarius Henderson. Not really a tackle, more of a guard. I look at this group. They got Shaq Mason. They got Kendrick Green, Nick Broker. Where does he fit? Is Henderson, again, a tackle? Is he going to back up Laramie Tunsil? Is he going to beat out David Sharp? Does he play on the right side? There's Charlie Heck on that side as well, with Blake Fisher, Titus Howard. What happens there? A lot of question marks with Ladarius Henderson. I just think this is a guy that didn't have a ton of length. I thought he struggled with speed. Not the overly powerful either. Lacks some length. So that was a big question mark there at the end of round number 7. But again, Houston, I thought they did a lot to continue to add to their roster. So overall, not a bad draft for them, even without a first-round pick. Indy, God, I loved Chris Ballard laughing. The number 1 defensive player off the board, I figured, was going to be Leatu Latu, the edge rusher out of UCLA, falling all the way to 15, and Ballard just sitting there laughing. We got the best defensive player in the draft. This is a guy. You've got Kwity Paye on the roster. You've got Samson Ebukam, Deo Odengbo. Those are 3 guys that played well, but Latu's going to come in and be a starter immediately. Impact starter. This is a guy who is he's so technically sound. Uses his hands very well. A guy that's explosive. I expect him to challenge for double-digit sacks and could challenge and be that defensive rookie of the year in his first season. A guy that, look, not only did he have 24 sacks, 35 and a half tackles for loss in his career, but a guy that lived in opposing backfields. The hits, this is a guy that just continued to put pressure on the quarterback even when he didn't get there. Just consistent pressure all the time. Love that pick. Then Adonai Mitchell in round number 2. A guy that I thought was ultimately going to come off the board in round 1, so to get him with the 20th pick in round number 2, that could very well end up being a steal. Adonai Mitchell, Alec Pierce, similar players, so that's the only thing that I thought was interesting. Taller guys that can be vertical threats, but definitely complements both of them to Michael Pittman Jr., the number 1 on the outside, and then Josh Downs, the slot. They also go with Anthony Gould in round 5. Out of Oregon State, a diminutive receiver, but a guy that I think is going to provide that nice complement to Josh Downs as that undersized receiver there in the slot. Matt Goncalves, a guy that is physical at the point of attack, battled some injuries. That's why we didn't get to see him there at the Senior Bowl or at the Combine. But a guy that, look, he's a technician, physical. I look at him, Braden Smith on the right side. You got Bernard Ryman on the left side. Goncalves is the guy that can be that swing tackle for you for sure. Tanner Bortolini is an athletic center. He's a guy that can also play guard. So I can see him backing up both Ryan Kelly and Will Fries. Where does he fit in there? Athletic, and a guy that, look, he played all over the line there for Wisconsin. So a nice pickup there for Ballard in round 4. Then we get to round number 6, and we get Jalen Carlisle. Jalen Carlisle is a guy that can end up being a linebacker for you because of his size. 6'3", 227 pounds. A guy that has good depth on the back end of the defense as well. Good range. A guy that's going to play around the line of scrimmage for you. I look at him, you got EJ Speed at that weak side backer at the will, right? There's Ronnie Harrison. Ronnie Harrison was also a safety, right? Out of Alabama. Undersized guy at that linebacker spot. Really, Carlisle is a guy that I think can end up being like a Divine Diablo. Moving into that safety spot, or that linebacker spot from safety. I think Carlisle is a guy that ultimately ends up challenging EJ Speed for that starting spot at the will. Saying it here first. The Jalen Simpson in round 5. As well. I'm sorry, Jalen Carlisle was taken 16th pick in round number 5. So they get Gould, Carlisle, and then Jalen Simpson as a safety. This is a guy that could also play corner, so he could potentially be that backup to Juju Brents, Dallas Flowers, potentially challenge Dallas Flowers for that starting spot. But a guy that can also potentially challenge Nick Cross for that starting free safety spot as well. Love the versatility. And then Micah Abraham, an undersized corner there out of Marshall, good ball skills. A guy that I think is going to be probably that backup to Kenny Moore at the nickel spot. And then Jonah Laulu out of Oklahoma, 6'5", 292 pounds. Veteran player, played at Hawaii for 4 seasons, Oklahoma for 2. A guy that can get some good push on the interior of the line. And when you look at this group, you got Grover Stewart and DeForest Buckner up front, Raekwon Davis, Taven Bryan, Adedemiwa Adebare. So where does Jonah Laulu fit in this group? I think he's ultimately a guy that would be a practice squad player, but a guy that is going to bring a lot of effort to the team. And so I do like the pick there in round 7. Really low risk, high reward. Jacksonville. Man, I had Jacksonville taking a receiver for the longest time with Brian Thomas. Ultimately, I had a corner falling into their laps, and thought it'd be too good to pass up, right? No, they ended up going with Brian Thomas Jr. Ultimately, you look at Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis. I still think they needed that other receiver. Brian Thomas Jr. is the guy. Look at 6'3", 209, 4'3", 340, tremendous length. He's a guy that's going to stretch the field for you, so I love that pick. Round 2, Mason Smith. Man, think about this pairing. Mason Smith with Ryan Nielsen. Mason Smith, they also have Eric Armstead. And I just look at this pairing. Armstead, Mason Smith learning from Eric Armstead, and I think Mason Smith can end up being that steal, because Ryan Nielsen has, he was a defensive tackle when I was at USC, friend of mine, and a guy that is known for developing D linemen. And we saw that when he was the D-line coach there at NC State. I love this fit, and I think Mason Smith can end up being a star. You look at Jarian Jones out of Florida State. Where does this guy fit? Right? Is he going to challenge Tyson Campbell on the outside? Is he going to challenge potentially for that nickel spot? They've got Darnell Savage on the roster, Antonio Johnson, Andre Sisco. 3 safeties there. Could one of those guys end up taking the nickel spot? Going to be interesting where they end up slotting Jarian Jones. Javon Foster, good value in round number 4 to be your swing tackle. But you also have Walker Little on the roster. So, question, would Javon Foster potentially be that guard? Because, we talk about his power. The foot speed was a big question mark, right? The power, the base, that was one of he could anchor, but he struggled with some speed. So maybe he is a guard. Ezra Cleveland was a tackle at Boise State. Ultimately kicks inside to guard. Had a great year there with Jacksonville. Javon Foster could potentially end up taking over for Brandon Sheriff if Brandon Sheriff has another lackluster season. Jordan Jefferson, round number 4 there, out of LSU, taking just 2 picks later. Another guy, look, where does he fit into the group? They took him in round number 4. They also have Devon Hamilton, Adam Gotsis on the roster, Jeremiah Ledbetter. He's one of those guys that's just going to have to push for playing time. DeAndre Prince out of Ole Miss. He's a taller corner, 6 foot, 183, scheme versatile. This is a guy that has good speed, real good top end speed. I think he'll ultimately challenge Tyson Campbell. He's going to be that corner more so than Jarian Jones. I think that ultimately challenge for a starting spot there. Keelan Robinson, curious pick, to be honest with you. They had Tank Bigsby, Dearness Johnson. Where does Keelan Robinson fit into the mix? He's more of a return man than anything for Texas. 5'8", 191. Surprising. He does have a burst, but I think it must be the return game that they're really looking to target him. He and Devin Duvernay there on the back end, but really a bit of a head scratcher there. Cam Little is going to end up supplanting Riley Patterson as their kicker. Thought maybe there was going to be a chance he could get taken there. So I like that pick. I think Cam Little's a guy that has a big leg for the Razorbacks. I think he ends up starting there. And then in round 7, Miles Cole. I talked about him going to Jacksonville potentially and being a guy that Ryan Nielsen could develop. I think ultimately he's the guy that'll probably end up on the practice squad to start. But you look at this group, you got Trayvon Walker, you got Josh Allen. These two guys, combined for 20 some odd sacks. It was ridiculous. You bring in Travis Gibson, you've got Yasir Abdullah. Miles Cole's a guy that I think is going to need to continue to develop, but a guy that I think can get after the quarterback. He has tremendous size, good burst. I think he ran in the 4.6s. 6'6", 278, tremendous length. Production, big question mark there. A guy that I think is still developing, very raw, but again, he's landing with Ryan Nielsen, probably the right spot to go for him. So I think that's going to be an interesting pick there. And look, we are pretty much at time, which means we're going to have to do another podcast to go over the rest of the NFL's picks, which just means we get to prolong the 2024 podcast series for at least one more podcast. Although we do need to do a look ahead to 2025 as well, so we'll probably throw that in there at the end. We also have to talk about the undrafted free agents as well, so maybe we have a couple of podcasts left. But we got to talk about Kansas City. That brings us to 16 overall with the teams that we'll look at, and then from there we'll go with the Chargers through the Washington Commanders to round everything out. When you look at KC, they trade up to get Xavier Worthy, and look. You have Marquise Brown, 5'11", 165. I know a lot of people were talking about him. Hey, this could be the new Tyreek Hill. No, Tyreek Hill is a bigger dude. When you look at this guy, he's got tree trunks for legs. He's a powerful guy who just happens to also be really fast. Yes, Xavier Worthy is fast, but you worry about him because he is just 165 pounds. He can easily be rerouted. I thought there were other guys. I thought, hey, maybe they'll go with Adonai Mitchell. Maybe they'll go with Lab McConkey. Maybe they'll go with Xavier Legette. They go with a different Xavier. They go with Xavier Worthy. That's going to be the big question mark. Patrick Mahomes, regardless of who he throws to, the guys can end up being stars, but he struggled to get production out of that receiver spot on a consistent basis since Tyreek Hill left. So can Xavier Worthy be that guy? I just think they forced that play looking for another guy that could be that next Tyreek Hill. I just don't think Xavier Worthy is that guy. Prove me wrong. Kingsley Suamataia, I thought that was a great pick there in round number 2. He's a guy that I thought was going to come off the board much sooner. I thought the Patriots could potentially take him there, needing a tackle. I look at Wanya Morris. I look at Jawan Taylor. Obviously with Donovan Smith leaving there at the left tackle spot, Wanya is going to be the guy right now. Suamataia, watch out for him there at left tackle. And look, Jawan Taylor, all the freaking penalties that the guy racked up a season ago. Obviously, he's under contract for a while. A lot of money that he's owed. But Suamataia is a guy to just keep an eye on. He's a swing tackle for sure, but a guy that could end up challenging Wanya Morris for that starting job. Round number 4, they get Jared Wiley. This guy is, he brings tremendous length. 6'6", 249 pounds, right? But then when you look at this tight end group, I think ultimately this tells you that, Blake Bell, the Belldozer out of OU, not going to be back. You look at it, you've got Noah Gray there. Jared Wiley is going to end up being that number 2 tight end. He's got good pass catching ability, but also a guy that can block. That's something that I think Noah Gray struggles with at times, so I think Jared Wiley can end up being that guy. Great pick in round number 4. They get Jaden Hicks in round 4 as well. Jaden Hicks, I think he could end up taking over that free safety spot from Brian Cook. He's a guy that can be a linebacker, play in the box, a guy that can also play over the top. Love that pick in round 4. And look, he's 6'2", 211. I think he's a future starter at the next level. Hunter Norzad in round number 5. You got Creed Humphrey there. He's, the big thing is Creed Humphrey's in a contract year. So I think Hunter Norzad is really that insurance policy in the event Humphrey does leave. I think they end up re-signing Humphrey, and then you've got Norzad as a nice depth piece behind him. Could Norzad potentially kick over to guard? That's a question mark. I think maybe he could end up taking over for Joe Tooney there at the left guard spot if Tooney ends up being a casualty or if he leaves when his contract is up. Jamal Haddon in round number 6, a physical corner, a guy that I really like. 6'1", 196. He's good in off coverage as well. Good instincts, drives on the ball in a hurry, can be very aggressive. He's a guy that, you've got Jalen Watson there and Trent McDuffie. I think he challenges Joshua Williams as that starter on the outside opposite Jalen Watson. And then in round number 7, they get C.J. Hansen out of Holy Cross, the guard, 6'5", 300. Started 38 games at right guard for them. Good quickness, good size overall, good technique. He'll be a backup there, backing up Tooney and Trey Smith. Do I think he would end up filling in and taking over for Joe Tooney if he's a casualty? I don't. I think ultimately that spot would go to Hunter Norzad. Potentially Suamataia. I think Suamataia, with his power and the athleticism, I think Suamataia can end up kicking inside the guard as well and then move outside potentially, depending on what happens with Wanye Morris. But I think it at least gives him a little bit of flexibility there. If nothing else, C.J. Hansen could be a nice depth piece, which is sorely needed there along the interior of that O-line in Kansas City. So, 16 teams down, 16 teams to go. Like I said, Chargers through the Washington Commanders. That'll be the next podcast. We'll bring that to you here in the next couple of days. We also have to look at the undrafted free agents. Then we also have to look ahead to the 2025 draft. Narrative for the 2025 draft is going to be depth on the defensive side of the football. We had so many offensive players come off the board early and often in this year's draft. It makes sense that next year we'll be targeting defense. We'll see a lot of defense. We are going to see some quarterbacks coming off the board as well. Hey, Raiders, Giants, you're finally going to get your quarterbacks that you're looking for, right? There are going to be other teams that I think will also be on the market for a quarterback. And, it's not as strong a quarterback class as we had this year, which was why we saw teams taking quarterbacks earlier on. But I still think we're going to see quite a few quarterbacks come off the board early. I think we'll see 3 or 4 in round number 1 when it's all said and done. So we'll cover that piece as well. But look, there are some undrafted free agents that I think could end up being diamonds in the rough for a few of these teams. The right situation for an undrafted free agent, and you never know. There are a lot of guys who ended up becoming breakout stars that were undrafted free agents. So we'll have to take a look at that, take a look at each team. Who are the undrafted free agents that we should be targeting there as well? So a couple more podcasts before we put a bow on the 2024 podcast series. So until next time, everyone, for ReadyForTheDraft.com, this has been the Ready for the Draft podcast. I've been your host, Gregg Schutze. Take care, everyone. Enjoy your week. And until next time, I am out of here.